Hey there, how's it going? What are you doing right now? Are you walking somewhere? Are you jogging? Are you on a treadmill or a bike? Or maybe you're just in your kitchen having breakfast, or you're at work on the down low with some headphones in. I wonder, how are you stealing the time out of your busy life to be listening to this right now? Well, whatever the answer is, I am incredibly grateful. Welcome. This is Yoga Talks Podcast. My name is Jay Brown. I so appreciate that we're not just coming at each other in bits and clicks, that we're going to spend a little time. You're going to sit down maybe, or we're going to have a conversation. And I don't know, last week I told you that it was rough, and I hate to say it, but this week was pretty downtrodden as well. In fact, 2 days ago, I ventured into the city. I don't go into the city a lot these days, but I had to go into the city, so I took a subway train, the L train, into Manhattan. And if you've ever taken New York City subway trains, you know there are sometimes performers who come on and will give pretty incredible shows. These are talented performers. Sometimes they do death-defying stunts. Well, a couple guys came on and put on a show, and they were good. Like, they had chops. They were not faking. And they put on their show, and they finished, and they got nothing. And usually, I would say every other time I've seen somebody do a show in a subway that good, when they're done, they get a little bit of love from someone. Maybe not change, but at least like a smile or a clap or something. And I was kind of all the way at the end of the car, and I kind of did a little bit of clapping, but I was really focused on what was happening, because when they finished and it was just like dead and there was nothing, the look on the performer's face was incredible. He clearly had been doing this for a lot of years, and he looked around in like confusion and amazement, and he said, "What's going on, people? This is not normal New York." And I thought, that's right. This is not normal New York. And, you know, I think everything's going to be okay, but I don't know. I mean, let me qualify that, because from a broader spiritual perspective, I know that we're okay. I know that I'm okay. But in terms of like the immediate sphere of phenomena that we are experiencing, who knows? I don't think anybody knows if we're going to be okay or not. And yesterday morning, I had a moment with my dear wife, who is a wonderfully empathetic soul. She feels things very deeply. She's incredibly honest, almost to a fault. These are all reasons why I love her so much. And I think she hadn't really been taking in what's been going on. And the other day she really just filled up on it. And then she woke up yesterday morning in literally a panic and asking me, "Is everything falling apart? Are we totally fucked?" And, you know, I couldn't really just say no. I don't know if we're fucked or not. But I can't change the situation in that broad way. You know, when I see it from that broad view, which I think is important, I feel that I have no power in that situation. But there are other situations where I do feel I have some power. And, this week, there weren't a lot of people in class. And I understand, because I think that doing yoga practice very often makes you more sensitive to what you're feeling. And if what you're feeling is uncertainty and despair, why would you want to do something that makes you feel that more intensely? You wouldn't. And so a lot of people didn't go to yoga class this week. But tonight, I had a really big class. It's the first big class I've had in weeks. And the sentiment I got was, I just got to do something at this point. I can't avoid it anymore. I have to try to do something to see if I can affect how I feel, because I don't want to feel like this. And once again, we were able to do it on some level, at least in the immediate. When people were leaving here tonight, I didn't feel helpless. I didn't feel hopeless. In fact, it felt very empowered to be around a bunch of people with a shared purpose. And I really think that's the power that we're going to have, And I'm going to talk about that more next week when Douglas Rushkoff comes on. I mentioned it last week. I let the cat out of the bag. Couldn't help myself. It's a very big moment for me personally. It's a big episode for the podcast. I've been really trying to formulate some directives for myself that help me feel more empowered. And some of those are really coming out of this conversation I had with Douglas that you are going to get to hear next week. Now, that is not to take away from today's talk with Brenda Feuerstein. Also incredibly significant for me, Georg Feuerstein, Brenda's husband, who passed away a few years ago, was a teacher of mine who I never met. I was deeply influenced by his writing. I know a lot of yoga teachers listen to the podcast. If you don't have a copy of the Yoga Tradition, I think you owe it to yourself to go get one. And a couple months back, I wrote a blog post and then posted it to my Facebook timeline. And out of nowhere, Brenda Feuerstein wrote this really lovely comment and friend requested me. I immediately accepted that friend request and wrote her a note just to say, Georg was hugely important to me. I would love to talk to you sometime about him and about you. And it took us a long time. Honestly, she ran into some health issues along the way there, but we finally managed to nail down the time, and it was everything that I could have hoped for. She's such a wonderful lady, and I really feel like she's carrying the torch for Georg, and it's just great. So you will get to hear all of that today. Let me also just quickly take care of some business. I'm going to be doing a bit of traveling, and if you would like to come meet me and have some practice, I would love that very much. I am going to be in Tarrytown, New York, February 26th at Riverstone Yoga. I'm going to be in Japan, March 18th through 26th. I am going to be in West Hartford, Connecticut, April 30th. And then I am going to be at the Feathered Pipe Ranch in Montana, June 17th through 24th. You can find out more about those events and read my blog and listen to the archive of this podcast and find out more about my online video offerings at jbrownyoga.com. Also, I just want to express some gratitude to everyone who's been supporting the podcast, especially your direct donations. They are really making things possible for me to do more with this podcast. So thank you so much for going to a blog or podcast page and making those donations. Thank you to those of you who went to iTunes and wrote us a review. Please, if you haven't done that yet, it's helpful and it shows us that you're out there and you'd like me to keep at it Also, the emails. Thank you for your emails, my friends. I really appreciate your communications. So if the podcast is speaking to you, if you just feel like you want to spout off or whatever, just if something's on your mind and you feel so inspired, don't hesitate to send it to me. I'd love to have that exchange with you. Okay, we can touch base again on the other side, but I think it's time. Let's go ahead and talk to Brenda Feuerstein. Well, good morning to you, Brenda. I'm so happy to have this opportunity to talk to you.
Good morning. It's just such a pleasure. We've been trying to set this up for a little while now, and finally my schedule is freed up a bit and my health is in a good place. So we're all set to go this morning.
I'm so happy about it, and I'm glad you're feeling better. First things, maybe I could just take care of the most trivial of matters. If you could clarify for me the pronunciation of your last name.
Sure. It's Feuerstein.
Feuerstein. See, I've pronounced it several different ways. I've heard it pronounced several different ways. Say it again for me.
So it's Feuerstein.
Feuerstein. Thank you.
Yeah.
And was it Georg or Georg?
Georg.
Thank you so much for that. I didn't want to be mispronouncing names throughout our entire talk, because some people are polite and they won't tell me.
That is quite fine. There's been many pronunciations over the years, and so it's nice to be able to have that clarity when I can do it.
Well, good. Now I will finally get it right for the first time in my life, because I've never pronounced it that way, ever.
Oh, really? How would you pronounce it?
I think I for a while I said Feuerstein, and then it was Feuerstein, but never Feuerstein.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've heard Feuerstein, so.
All right, for the record, everybody listening, Feuerstein.
That's correct.
All right, well, Brenda, I mentioned to you in our kind of interactions before finally getting together to have this talk that Georg was this huge influence on me. And there was some of his works that just really profoundly shaped my direction. So for someone I never met, he's, like sometimes you have teachers you've never met. Well, yeah. Georg was definitely one for me. And so when we kind of came across each other on Facebook, I got, oh my gosh. So I'm so excited to maybe flesh it out, because I don't know a lot about him or you. And I did kind of search around online, and you guys have a pretty light digital footprint. There's not a lot extensive information about you guys. So,
Georg was very much an introvert. And so in terms of face-to-face people who were studying with him, there were very few. And there's really only one larger body of video work that was done on him. And then, of course, with Gita Desai and Paula Fossey doing documentaries. But he kept a pretty low profile and preferred to, basically be at home and teach through his writing and courses.
Well, he was pretty effective at that, teaching through his writing. And when did you meet him?
I met Georg face-to-face. We met in June of 2003. So prior to that, I had actually enrolled in the 800-hour course, which is the one that you're participating in.
Yeah.
So that was my kind of first correspondence with him in a significant way, was through the course. But of course, for years prior to that, I was definitely reading his work and felt, I guess, that someday I wanted to meet him face-to-face to just kind of figure out a little bit more about what he was studying and what he was researching on, and of course, what he was writing as well. So my first encounter was in 2003 when I went down to what was then the YREC Research and Education Center by Mount Lassen.
The Yoga Research and Education Center, right?
Yes, that was by Mountain, close to Mount Lassen, I guess, in Northern California. And I was a volunteer. I decided that I had kind of taken some time off from teaching, and I wanted to do some work at a center in a place that I really believed was doing good work. I felt that Georg was on the right track with yoga philosophy and trying to bring more the spiritual side of yoga.
So so that's when you first started coming into contact with him, but it seems like you were into yoga long before that. So when did you first get into yoga?
Oh, I have my mom to thank for that. When I was about, I guess, my mom's not really clear. My thinking of that age, I was preschool, so I'm going to say probably somewhere between the ages of 4 and 5. My mom picked up Richard Hittleman's book at kind of a local pharmacy. And
it is amazing how often that book comes up on this podcast.
Yeah, I think
so many people were influenced by that book. It's incredible.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it certainly changed my mother's life. And she introduced me to that. And then later on, there was yoga by Corrine. So it was Corrine Zebroff, who had moved to Canada and from Germany, as a matter of fact. And she had this show on TV, and my mom and I would do it. And the focus at that time was probably, I would say, a good 80 to 90% physical. And then my mom still introduced some kind of meditation, whether that was through prayer or through just sitting quietly. She certainly introduced that to me as well.
And where were you? Where did you guys live?
We were in central Saskatchewan. I grew up in a farm. Yeah, it was kind of an idyllic, for me, it was an idyllic childhood that, as an introvert, kind of led me deeper into the contemplative mode, which I, probably embrace even more so now. But,
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So you were like on a yoga retreat as a kid.
I definitely was.
Wow. And so that carried on as you got older? Did that leave you at some point and then come back, or did you just, it was like a constant thread throughout?
In terms of
like
yoga?
Like when you were in high school, did you continue doing yoga, and then in college it just carried through, or was there a time in your life where yoga wasn't something that was like part of what you were doing? Since you started at such a young age,
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you for asking that. I think that it really kind of wove its way through my life, and it went up and down for a period of time. I think as an early teenager, I had probably very little interest in that. Like most teenagers, I was doing my stuff, and I was heavily immersed in music at that time. And now when I talk to a few people and I talk to them about, my training in music, and they say to me, "Oh, well, that was your yoga." And I said, "Yeah, actually, I guess it was. That's where meditation and focus really came into play."
Mm-hmm.
It was a different kind of yoga, I guess you could say, as a musician.
I totally relate to that, though, because I didn't get to yoga till much later in my life, like to my 20s. But prior to that, I always had like creative outlets. Like I was a theater kid and later had music too. So it seemed like those were kind of the outlets where I was finding yoga as well before I ever found yoga. That makes sense to me.
It totally does. And I think that when we step away from the idea that yoga is just asanas, we start to see how so many of us, just through the path of life, have engaged in different aspects of yoga on the creative path, right?
Yeah, and so you and me have something in common then, because you were like a student of yoga who found some of Georg's writing, and you're like, wow, this guy makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
And so then you went to meet him, and then what was like that? What was that like the first time you ever met him? Did you like meet him in person?
The first time I ever met him in person was very funny. I think I was probably one of the first or one of the few people in Georg's life who just kind of treated him like a normal human being the first time I met him. So,
Why, like, people treated him with like a certain air of reverence or something? Like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, reverence, and because he was such a recluse in a way, being an introvert, people didn't really know how to read him either. I think he was really misunderstood in the public eye for many years.
Well, I mean, I could get it because his writing is so profound in certain ways. It's kind of intimidating. I think I'd be intimidated to try to talk to him. Although I would do my darndest to just treat him like a normal guy, which is what you probably did.
Yeah, so I asked him the big questions, So what did you learn from your mom?
See, that's the right question.
And he just kind of stopped in his tracks and he looked at me and he just said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm, just a little Canadian girl who is interested in actually who you are underneath the surface. How does yoga kind of bubble up through you? I know that you're an incredible scholar. Your translations have moved me and have helped me become the practitioner that I am today. But what's underneath all that? What's the prana that's actually propelling that to the surface in an outward way?" So I was asking those big questions, and I think that we literally sat on a swing outside all night long and talked about life, where he grew up, the influence of his parents, where he went to school, all those sorts of things. And I think that it was just a refreshing change for him.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I get that. I mean, even with this podcast, like my wife, she doesn't even really listen to the podcast so much.
Right.
And like, so then people are like listeners, but she just does me as the guy who doesn't do his dishes.
Right. Exactly.
I so need that in my life, I need that. That's important.
Yeah, I think I believe that I brought the world of yoga on a more day-to-day life platform for Georg, so that, as we transitioned to Canada, things shifted. He saw, things differently. And
well, I'm sorry, first, before we go to Canada, I think, when you met him, was he still involved with like the British wheel of yoga? Was he already separated, done with that? Or where was he in his like career line?
Okay, so probably most people don't know Georg from years ago when he was in England. And so in 1973, he actually started an organization in England. And he had a magazine at that time called the Yoga Studies, which I'm bringing back to life now. But that's kind of where it started. And then he moved to the United States in the early 80s. And from there, YREC, the Yoga Research and Education Center, started after that. And so that would have been in, March of 1999 when YREC actually started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I discovered YREC had an early website, like before other people did. Like, because I remember like the early days of the internet, I was like hired by this like new internet company that was creating this holistic health hub, and I was the yoga guy, and I was supposed to go online. I was using Alta Vista search engine. It was before Google, if you remember, right? And I was trying to find yoga websites, and I found like a YREC website or something that had stuff on there. That's one of the first times I ever found them. So it's right around that time. So it must have been pretty soon after that kind of started. So that organization he started in England, that was not the British Wheel of Yoga, though.
No, it was not the British Wheel of Yoga. That one...
Because he was involved there at some point, wasn't he?
Just in a very superficial way, actually. I think he was on the board of directors at one point in time and did some teaching there.
Okay.
But when he was going to university in Durham, that's when he would have started the yoga organization, doing research and doing a lot of translations, doing lots of publications at that time.
Okay. And so then he comes to America, and there's YREC, and at what point do you know, because at some point he was also with the IAYT, wasn't he? Like the International Association of Yoga Therapists. Was he involved there too?
Yes. Well, Larry Payne, and as you know, probably Larry Payne and Richard Miller started that in 1989,
Mm-hmm.
and they were an independent. I believe it was 1989. Yeah, as an independent nonprofit, and then in 1999, Georg actually decided to step in. They were dissolving that nonprofit, I believe, at that time, and Georg decided to have it as a special division of YREC.
Okay. So for a while, he ran the IOIT.
Yeah, his capacity really was as editor, and his wife at that time was doing a lot of the work with IOIT, actually. So a lot of the research that was being done, and she was, instrumental in doing the publication at that time as well. So Georg participated in the way that he was the editor, and he was doing, I believe, an article for every publication.
Mm-hmm. So it seemed like he just found ways to continue kind of contributing to this conversation about yoga like he started back in England, in America, wherever he could.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And certainly at that time, and, until his death, certainly Larry and Richard were close friends. And I know that he wanted to make sure that work continued on, right? And if YREC could be of help to that, they would be.
Right. Okay, so at some point he starts to do courses and you discover them, right?
Yeah, well, it was in 1999, actually, that he decided that he was going to develop the 800-hour course, which is the one that you're participating in.
Mm-hmm.
And he started developing that with James Bay. So at the time, I believe his name would have been Jagadish, his spiritual name. And so the two of them kind of worked on this together, and they developed this massive course. And at the same time, YREC was wanting to build a significant kind of university. And that meant that they needed to get funding, which was coming in at that time from various donors. And they had 700-hour yoga teacher training program as well. So that's what they were developing at the time. So that was the 800-hour course was actually the first course that Georg developed.
And was that, did the course come before the Yoga Tradition book or after the Yoga Tradition book?
After.
I see. So that course, it seems to me, because that book, the Yoga Tradition, which is like all yoga teachers out there, if you don't have it, you should go get it. It's not the kind of book that you just kind of read cover to cover, though,
No.
Like you go to it and you leave it and you go to it. So it makes sense that you would make a course for people to kind of digest it, Yeah,
basically we called it unpacking that huge book, right?
Yeah.
I hear people go, "Oh, I've got that sitting on my bedstand." And all I can think of is, wow, you read that before you go to bed at night? Like, I'm impressed, right?
I could read it before I go to bed, but again, in like pieces, like I really have to sit with it, and sometimes I have to go back and read things again. It's
well, and that's really what it's meant for.
Yeah.
There's just no possible way. I don't believe that we can get the whole depth of that book.
That's like a lifetime's worth of scholarship. That's what that is.
It pretty much is, right?
Yeah.
And so the 800-hour course really unpacked that book quite nicely, and it leads people just systematically through the book, going deeper and deeper into what Georg couldn't put in the book, right? Because after a while, you can only have so much in a publication, and the publishers start to say, "Wait a minute, stop now."
We have to try to sell this,
Exactly. So that's kind of the beautiful part about the 800-hour course is it helps people really take the yoga tradition and unpack it, figure out, the 4 reflection questions, I guess, are the part that I really love about all of our courses. And that helps the students figure out how does that apply to our life? And where do we see this? And that for me is really important. As much as I'm a philosopher, I am also a doer. I'm very hands-on, and I love to find the practicality in philosophy.
Well, you haven't gotten my first questionnaire yet because I'm taking my time with it. I really want to do it fully. So, but you're going to get my questionnaire. I love that it's interactive and that we're going to get to have that exchange. So I'm looking forward to that.
And I guess that's, one of the things that Georg really wanted was the bulk of our courses needed to be correspondence between the tutor and the student. So it's not something that's done online and you check off the questionnaire and you find out right there whether it's right or wrong. I actually go through your questionnaire and I read your responses and your short answers and your essays and I give you feedback, and then there's dialogue that happens. So sometimes when people go, oh, maybe that's a huge financial investment for the course, I go, well, not really. Like by the time I'm done, I'm maybe making like $8 an hour on this course.
Like if you add up the hours, I know what you mean. It's like,
yeah, because I just love tutoring, right? I love being a tutor. I love corresponding with students and, connecting with them on a really individual way, especially through the essays, because that's where I kind of challenge students to find something that they're really passionate about. And then I put a twist on it and get them to start doing research in that area.
Nice. Well, seems to me that kind of passion, that's also like goes back to when you met Georg, like so you were a student of his, and then you guys made some connection there beyond just being teacher and student.
Yeah. And I guess
I say that because I met my wife in my class, and there's controversy about that, and I've written about that in the past, and I've always maintained that there's a big difference between somebody like using their position as a teacher to manipulate students, and somebody finding real partnership through their work. So I don't know. So you were a student, but was there any controversy back when or anything?
I guess what I made very clear to Georg right from even during our initial email correspondence was I wasn't looking for a spiritual teacher.
Yeah.
I had a teacher at that time, and what I was looking for was more academic, scholarly, and so that's kind of where we met. Mm-hmm. On that path.
So it was more of like a scholar, one scholar to another scholar, rather than like.
In a way, yeah. I mean, certainly you could say that he taught me. He taught me a lot, and I taught him a lot as well. And our form of teaching and learning was really with each other was more kind of like this Tibetan debate style. So one of us would floor and the other one would stand up. And because I wasn't a very good audio learner, I was really good at reading, but my listening skills were not that great, which was interesting. I could listen really well when it came to music, but when it came to people's voices, I didn't hear the music in it, right, until later on. And so Georg removed the texts for me. So anything that I learned was literally without texts. He would recite it, and I would have to, if it was a sutra, I would have to say it and break it down that way. And it was painful, but it was a beautiful process, and probably one of the biggest learning experiences for me. And I feel really deeply blessed that someone recognized that was something in my life that wasn't helping me move forward in a significant way. And I think that it did help me become a much better teacher in the end.
It opened up possibilities. You had things that you could do now that you couldn't do before.
Yeah. It also makes me kind of probably a challenging teacher as well, because I may make, more demands, if you want to say.
Well, isn't that interesting? And in contrast to like the service economy oriented teaching that sometimes happens, to challenge your students. But I like what you're saying, because you're challenging the student wasn't making you do like a harder body position. challenging the student was sort of seeing like a blinder in somebody or noticing something about someone and then engaging in a practice that helps them to kind of address that or find, like, again, more range of possibility, which to me means freedom.
Exactly. And both Georg and I believed, and I still say this, that there are many asana teachers out there and exceptional ones, right? Exceptional ones. And they all of them offer a different perspective, I think, than the next one. But I think what happens is there's something lost when we can't figure out a way to bring the deeper teachings of yoga through even an asana practice. And so that's probably where my stronger point is finding a way to help people understand yoga philosophy through movement.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I've talked about that too, because I certainly had some proficiency with the form before I had the other thing that you're talking about, and there was pretty bad repercussions, like it wasn't a great situation, and it wasn't until there were more like ideas and philosophy behind what I was doing that it became like effective for me. So I think it's essential that there's got to be that thought and swadhyaya self-study to it. Otherwise it just becomes this rote physical thing that I think actually can become detrimental very easily.
Sure, it becomes physical fitness, right?
Yeah, but physical fitness isn't necessarily bad. It's only when it's physical fitness and you say it's yoga, that then it gets weird or something, it gets problematic.
Yeah, and I have a postural yoga practice.
Mm-hmm.
I introduced more of one to Georg's life because he wasn't really that interested in postural yoga.
So that's good. That's a question I wanted to ask. If he practiced, so you were someone who got him into actually doing some practices.
Yeah, I introduced him to Kumye, so Tibetan yoga by Tartan Tulku Rinpoche, who brought it to the United States. And so we did that form of yoga together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's much different. Georg had, a broken arm when he was a child, so he had an arm issue that made a lot of postures very difficult. Mm-hmm. A hip injury from a fall. So they were physical injuries that, the odd person would say, oh, we can fix that with yoga. And,
no, you can't fix anything with yoga, but I know you could maybe help it.
Actually, his surgeon couldn't even fix it, so I don't think so.
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah.
But not saying that I don't believe that
you can heal. People can heal. People can heal, yeah. It's just the word fix is like a trigger for me or something.
Yeah, definitely. And I believe that therapeutic applications of yoga now it's important research. Mm-hmm. And I'm thrilled to see that happening in a bigger way. And, my hope, of course, along the way is that the people who are studying the therapeutic or medical applications for yoga also incorporate the training of the mind, at least in that, right?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a nice way to bridge it some, too. It doesn't have to be the more mystical or esoteric aspects, but even just aspects of mind might be a way in,
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if we're going to say it's a mind-body practice and use it as therapy, then we've got to include the mind.
Good point. All right, so by the time you were done with the 800 course, were you guys like a thing?
Yeah, actually, I had pretty much finished the 800-hour course by the time...
Oh, you guys sat and were talking. Okay, so you were done with the course by then.
I was done with the course, and I was actually working on helping him develop the next course, which was the classical yoga course.
All right.
And
so that's not too long before you guys moved to Canada, right?
Right. It was in end of June of 2004. We decided that we were going to take off, and we were both kind of really tired, burnt out. Georg had just finished a massive teacher training and doing a lot of in-person work, which was challenging for him, and a lot of traveling, right, which again was very challenging for him.
When you say challenging for him, is that a reference to the fact that he was an introvert and then he had to go? If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.